All right, David, so here's how I do this. So for the feeding process, I have sourdough that I've taken out of the fridge, okay? This has actually sat in the fridge for like almost 2 weeks because I was on a business trip. So normally I'll kind of start by just giving that a quick stir. Get it all reconstituted. Make sure to get the bottoms, kind of go around. And then when the spatula is kind of wet like that, the reason why I like these harder spatulas is I can just use the sides, scrape it back in, and I can kind of go around and push it all down. This is just showing you what I do. You don't have to do all of this, but I really like these spatulas for this. Okay, so now I have my scale here, so I then do a quick tear, and I'm bringing in 50 grams of the starter. $42, $44, $45, $46, $47. Doesn't have to be perfect, but I try to get it as close as I can. Okay, 49. That's probably good enough. Okay, just make sure this doesn't drip everywhere. All right, there's one of them. I always do 2 at a time. So normally you would like use the 50 grams of your starter and then throw out whatever's left as discard, and then you'd continue feeding your starter to propagate it. But I just make 2 loads at the same time because it's like easier work. Oops. So that actually turned out like 53 grams. So what I'll kind of do then is I'll just go in there and grab a little out. All right, 49, 50. All right, cool. So that's that. So these jars are all the exact same. That's another really big tip I'll give, is that way you don't have to keep tearing because you know they weigh the same. So I know that I have 97 grams of starter in here. Now, I think the instructions would say you would discard down to 50 grams and then feed it with another, you'd feed it with 50 grams of water and 50 grams of flour to be back to 150 grams. But I kind of like to have a little bit of surplus, especially if I'm trying to make an extra batch, like maybe I'm making pizza dough, or I'm making cinnamon rolls or whatever. So I'll keep it at like 97, which is just fine. Then I'll just add to it from here. So I'll tear that out. I'm using RO water, so now I'm going to add 50 grams. And then I'll do a purposeful mess up for you to kind of show you something else I do to compensate. So let's say I accidentally go to like 60 grams. All right, so I'm at 59 grams of water that I've added. So rather than trying to scoop the water back out, which at this point would be really frustrating and hard to do, I'll just tear it there, and then I'm gonna add 59 grams of flour to it. And that's just another way too that I can build up the starter slowly over time. So I like to use a big spoon because it's something that makes it relatively easy to measure, because once you get close, I'm at 57 right now, I can just kind of take this and shake little bits of flour until I'm to 59. So I have a perfect 1-to-1. And then the last thing is getting this all mixed up, and that's where this kind of stiffer spatula is nice too, because I can scrape this in. Oh, see, that's exactly what I tried to avoid. You don't want to go at it too hard at the beginning because you'll send the flour flying. I didn't lose too much, so it's not a big deal. But it's sort of like getting it sort of coarsely integrated, and then eventually you just want to keep stirring it until you don't see any lumps. Nice and smooth. So like right now there's still a few lumps in there, so I'm going to keep going. And you don't need to really clean out your starter jar. I try to scrape down the sides as much as possible to keep it a little bit tidy. But honestly, you want your bacteria to kind of be familiar, at least that's what Daniel tells me. It's like a home or whatever. They like their environment, and there's no need to clean it out because they will maintain that environment for you. All right, so that's getting pretty close. I always make sure I get down into the edges and kind of scrape out any excess lumps or whatever. Okay, and my last step, I just kind of clean it up. Get everything as much as I can off the spatula, which I'm not going to worry about cleaning the spatula because I'm going to use the same one for doing the leaven. But I'm going to just scrape down my sides like that, try to get as much of it as I can into the bottom. Okay, so that's what that looks like. All right, and that's about it. What I will say is the excess around the rim, it ends up drying and flaking, so it may make a little bit of a mess in your fridge, but not a huge deal. All right, so I'm gonna do a part 2 now. I'm going to make the leaven. All right, so I already have my 50 grams of starter that I've measured before. I'm going to zero out my scale. All right, so I had used quinoa flour for my starter because it seems to be just fine with that. And I'm not going for consistency, I'm just going for feeding. Plus I bought a bunch of quinoa flour a while ago and I'm trying to use it up. So that's fine. You don't necessarily have to use any of your specialty flours for the feeding. It seems to be just fine for me. All right, so I have my little cheat sheet where I kind of write everything down on a very small, quick note so that I'm not having to pull up the massive document every time. But basically, my leaven is 50 grams of starter, 100 grams of water, 60 grams of millet, and 40 grams of buckwheat. So I'll start by doing my 60 grams of millet. Again, I like to use the spoon because it makes it easy to kind of get that last couple of grams sorted out. So now I'm at 58 grams. And I'm not going for decimals. As long as you kind of get it to the nearest whole gram, it's totally fine. Right. So there's my 60 grams of millet. The other thing too is that if you're like a little bit above or a little bit below, I think that the total volume of flour is more important. So I'll just kind of make up the difference. So oftentimes I won't tear for my second flour, so that way I can at least try to get even closer on the total volume. So it's just like 59 grams, kind of going back and forth from 59 and 60. So now I'm going to add the buckwheat until this gets to 100. Okay, I'm at 99. 101, that's right. And then tear this up and come back with 100 grams of water. Nope, 102, 101, all right, perfect. Okay, so same thing here. And I noticed too that when I use the quinoa flour, it seems to be a lot more stiff or like Play-Doh-y than when I use this millet and buckwheat flour. So you can already see it's a lot more runny, right? So this is gonna be easier to get to the consistency, but same kind of thing. Kind of start with some vigorous stirring to try to get out all the lumps. Go into the bottom. Scrape in the corners. Scrape down the sides as I go. Right, so it should be looking pretty smooth like that. That's pretty much it. So now, so you'll notice how much runnier that is, and that's okay, because every flour has a different absorbency and all that, so that's why it's important to follow the flour mixture for the actual bread, because if you start switching up your flours, you may have to adjust your water and flour amounts in order to make it the right consistency, but so you can kind of see that kind of shakes like that, so that's all right, and that's what I was looking for there, and so that's basically it. Put the cap on. Now for me, I'm doing 2 at a time, so I'll go ahead and do the second one right away. I already noticed a big difference in the runniness of my starter consistency versus my leaven consistency, just based on the flours. But I'm not gonna do the second one for you, just to kind of keep the video shorter, but that's the process. And then I'll just leave all of these out on a countertop. You want them to be kind of room temperature, so 70, 72 degrees, something like that. And the colder they are, the longer they'll take. And I pretty much do all of my growing on the counter, so even my starter, so I'll leave the starter on the counter for you know, 6 to 8 hours or whatever, up to 12 sometimes to let it rise. I'll do that. I'll leave it out the same as with the leavens, and then once the starter has kind of seemed fully risen, I'll just stick that in the fridge and use it whenever I use it. And with the leavens, then I'll transition over to making the dough. Okay, so I'm actually forgot to start it early enough, but I'll do the second batch for you too. So I have added the 300 grams of water, 10 grams of oil, and then 19 grams of psyllium, and I'm just kind of beat this vigorously. Okay, so right now it's still going to be kind of fluid, but I'll show you in about 5 minutes that's going to gel up. All right, so I don't have 2 of the big guys, but because I'm making 2 loaves, I'll start 2 of these right away because this takes a little bit of time for it to set. Okay, so getting back to 300 grams of water. Oops, that's 304. 298. Yeah, good enough. 299. All right, now I do the tare, and I do 10 grams of oil, another tare, and 19 grams of psyllium. So psyllium was a thing that messed me up at the beginning, and what I found was that it was very easy to tell when it wasn't working out because the loaf was very purple. Like, have you ever seen purple bread before? It makes bread purple. And so I don't know what the exact chemical properties are, but that was a surefire sign then that was not providing the right consistency for the bread. Okay, so you're still kind of fluid at this point. This one's already starting to firm up, so you know it's good because I can basically turn this upside down and it won't flow out. And that's what you're looking for. When I had the bad psyllium, when it was not setting up properly and I was getting purple bread, that would not happen. It would like flow out still. Okay, so we've got the water, liquids, and psyllium resting in there, and now I go through the process. I've got my cheat sheet. Okay, so I go through the process of adding all the dry stuff. So I start with 80, where is it? Oh, right here. 85 grams of millet. I like using a spoon, a large spoon, because I can kind of get a decent amount of volume, but then I can also fine tune it. So that was 85. I can fine tune it as I get closer by shaking a little bit in. All right, so buckwheat and sorghum are both the same amount. So this is buckwheat, and I do 40 grams. That's 40. You can kind of get a sense for it too as you do this. It'll go really fast. Now, one thing I've thought about is pre-mixing this on a large volume so that I don't have to do this every time, but I don't know. Lazy me hasn't gotten to it yet. And the other thing I like to do is when I do flours back to back, like buckwheat and sorghum are both 40, 82, that's fine, are 40 and 40. I'll just kind of do those back to back because it's honestly more important to have the cumulative accurate than the individuals accurate. So I'll do potato and tapioca now. Where's my, oh, there you go. And these are 50 grams each. And you can definitely tell the differences in the density. That was 51, so now I'll just compensate making this one only 49, but I'm just gonna bring it up to 100. There we are. And the last piece. The last piece is salt. So we just need 10 grams of salt. Okay, and that's where the whisk comes into play again. So I'll just give it a mix like this. It's kind of doing two things. It's kind of like sifting the flour to get clumps out, but it's also blending it all together, getting it nice and ready. Okay, so that's what the flour looks like, and now the next step is I'm going to mix in the liquids. So I had actually done my leaven yesterday and didn't get around to it, so I put it in the fridge. And so it's okay. Like the literature will say it needs to be active. I find that maybe it's just the strain is really good, because I don't know, I don't have any other experience, but as long as it's been active and in the fridge, it seems to work. Like the only thing that's really important with timing is the actual dough, meaning you don't want to overproof or underproof the dough. You kind of want to time it so that the very last ferments, you hit the peak of the dough, and so it's not deflated, it's not still rising, and you bake it at that point, and that's kind of that 6 to 8 hour mark. I can go as long as 12 hours, this will be okay. But besides that, there's still active culture in what you're doing, and it's not, I find for this particular dough, it's not super critical to have the dough, the starter or the leaven be active at the time that you're doing the next step. So you see here it's still, relatively, mixed, but there's still inconsistencies, and that's fine. I found that that's perfectly adequate mixing at this stage, because I'll be relying a lot on the large mixer stand, KitchenAid, and now all this goes in. And it's crazy to think that there was 310 grams of liquids in this, but that's really the importance of the psyllium, right? That's what makes this bread work so well, because at least according to the literature, that's what's helping to replace that gluten to help create that binding. So what I do for this stage now is I just do enough kind of, I'll say cutting. There's a side of this here that's kind of small. I use that to just kind of like cut through that big gelatinous lump that I poured in here and kind of get the start of the flours mixing in. And I'm not really mixing so much as just creating more surface area so that I can let the KitchenAid do the final mixing. But if you don't do that cutting process, it takes it a lot longer. So, all right, so now I'm gonna take this over here, all right? Okay, so now I'll turn it on medium speed. Okay, I start at like 2 out of 10 to start with, and eventually I'll go up to 4 out of 10 when it gets a little bit more mixed up. If you go too fast too soon, it'll pick up the flours everywhere. And if you look at it just now and you're thinking there's no way that this is all going to mix in, and you'd be tempted to add some water in, but just don't. It's going to be perfect. So that looks pretty good. Just the right kind of consistency. It's like almost like Play-Doh, but a little stickier. Right? So that's what I'm looking for. All right? So if it's soupier than that, it's not right. And like I said, it was typically the psyllium that was causing the problems before too. All right. So I kind of let my bannetons develop like a, I don't know, you call it like a patina. I don't know. It's just sort of like a leftover crust of flour and a little bit of the dough stuff. That's fine. Honestly, that's worked really well. And so kind of what I'll do here is I'll take just a little bit of potato starch, right? Just like that. And I'll So I get to do this easily because I have two of them. I just cap them together and give it kind of a quick shake. And all I'm doing is just sort of recoating the surface just a little bit. And now, okay, I will just use the spatula, drop the dough out, and I'm just kind of pressing it into place and letting the banneton shape the dough for me. And you know, if you've seen actual sourdough before, this is totally different, but this works really well for me. With actual sourdough, you're doing all kinds of folding. You're grabbing the top and you're kind of rolling it under the bottom, and you're making a very smooth surface that way. I just find that the grain-free or gluten-free sourdoughs do not pull like regular sourdoughs do, and this has worked just fine. So that's now ready to go, and I'll do the other one, so I'll go off camera, but now I would take the, one of these flour towels, and I'll get it wet, and I'll just place it over the top and let it rise for like 6 hours, all right? All right, so just to give you a peek here, I got both of my loaves currently rising inside of the bannetons underneath the wetted towel. And if I peel that back, you can see it's still working on rising. It's still pretty flat, but this is only about an hour or two in since I started. So we'll watch this over the course of time as this rises, and I'll show you what it looks like towards the end. Okay, so the dough has risen now. Sometimes, you know, if it's not rising fast enough, you can put it near some heat. In fact, I think it was probably because the leaven had been in the fridge before I mixed it into the dough, but this probably didn't rise as fast as I would normally expect, but it's ready to go now, so I'm gonna go ahead and bring it over. So let me show you how I do the scoring and transfer process. So I always start first by getting a square of parchment paper. You can get like reusable silicone mats. I haven't invested in those yet, but this seems to do the trick. All right. I have preheated the oven to 450 degrees Fahrenheit with the Dutch ovens in there to preheat. All right, so that's what it comes out. You're just gonna have some flour left over on there from having floured the banneton with the towel. So honestly, I just kind of like store it like that now. I don't do anything special, so I just kind of leave it. You can do all kinds of fun designs. So like one that I like to do is like leaf type patterns. And what you're doing is a couple things. One, you're making a design because it looks pretty. Another thing is you're creating stress reliefs, because as the inside expands in the cooking process, you're allowing sort of like fault lines for the bread to grow. Just be creative. You can't really like mess this up. Sometimes if I'm being lazy, I'll just do like a cross on top. I'll do that for the next one for you. You know, all kinds of fun patterns. All right, so let me get a little heating pad, or a little pad here. And this is where you want to be careful, because I've definitely burned myself before. You want to make sure you be careful, because this thing is preheated now really hot. So I will take this and set that inside. So one of the nice things about the banneton too is that it's the right diameter for the pan. But now get 4 ice cubes, put them in between the parchment paper, and then you want to put the lid on right away. What you're doing here is trapping the steam, okay? So now, put this back in. Like I said, I always like to do 2 at the same time because it helps me save time. It's more efficient. Put that out there. Okay, so now the second one. And I'll put the parchment paper like this before I then flip the banneton. I think I I've seen other people use like an oiled metal bowl or something like that. And I just find it's important here that this has been allowed to breathe, right? You want this to have developed kind of a skin. If you put it in a bowl, this will still be kind of wet and it results in a weird crust. So if I'm feeling lazy, I'll just do one big cut like that, and a cut like that, kind of like a hot cross bun type of thing. So now I will put that in here, okay? So you can kind of see that. Okay. 4 ice cubes. And make sure to trap all that steam, get that lid on. And now, toss it back in the oven. So the first 30 minutes is baking with the lid on. So I'll set the timer for 30 minutes. Okay, so that's gonna go, and then after 30 minutes, I'll just take the lids off. Okay, we're at the halfway mark. So I just had a half an hour, so I'm gonna take off the lid. You can see they're starting to toast up a little bit on the inside. Now they're gonna get some additional color. Okay, but I'm gonna close this up for another 30 minutes. So we have the bread just finished. I'm gonna take it out. Okay. And nice little crust going on there. So I'll take it out right away. And put it onto a cooling rack. Okay, nice crust. See the bottom? Okay, some springiness to it. All right, here's the other one. Okay. Same thing. There we go. That's what they look like when they come out. And now the hardest part is you have to wait like an hour or two for them to cool off before you cut into them, because they need to breathe a little bit. All right, that is how you make sourdough.